Hi there, welcome back to the Blueprints Connections class. This type of connection that we are going to talk about is a bit more comprehensive. We've already talked about some useful connections that will help us in our ArcViz experiences. Now we're just going to take it up to another level. We'll show you something that's really useful for first-person interactivity. So, what is a connection between blueprints? Well, it's a way to access functionalities from another blueprint. Simple as that. So we send out a message, send it to the receiver sends information back to us, and in that way we have a connection, okay? And it also helps us to open up different properties within the blueprints as well, just as we've seen in our previous classes. And we can make them public by using the cast2 connection. However, there is another way to do it, which we'll show you in this video. We can add an interface in a specific blueprint. And in this case, the one we're looking at, we'll use these to send a message to everyone, almost like a Wi-Fi signal, where the router sends a message to everybody. And it emits those waves, doesn't it? Those frequencies, and everyone receives it, okay? So let's show you in practical terms how that works. So you can even determine, I want to send a message to this blueprint and affect the intensity. And then it's going to understand the message and it's going to react, right? So this is how the connections can work within blueprints. Now, and this type of blueprint is called a blueprint interface. So we'll create a connection interface inside our blueprint now then. So how are we going to use this in practice? Well, we'll create an interface in our first person and it's going to send an interaction message. For example, I'll set up a key for our first person, and when I push it, it's going to send a message, and that blueprint that receives it will then execute something. So let's suppose I send a message to the lampshade, and then that lampshade is going to receive it, like, hey, I want to interact with you, maybe a message like that. It's going to receive that message, it's going to interpret the message, and when the first person interacts with it, it's going to execute something. And that something might be turning the lights on, for example. So every time I push the key, I interact with the blueprint. So let's suppose I go to a tap, for example. Every time the first person sends a message to the tap, it's going to execute another routine. For example, it's going to start the water running. And then the sender, the same. The message is the same. The receiver, the same. It's going to interpret the message. It's basically what we include in our first person, that interaction ability, so that we can be communicating with different blueprints, okay? Giving them commands or giving them instructions to perform their unique abilities. We can also do this when it comes to changing floor materials as well. You'll be looking at a floor material blueprint and you tell it, change material, and there you go, interaction from the first person, and the blueprint understands that that's what you want it to do. So let's have a look at this in practice, shall we? Let's do that now. What do we have to do first? Well, we have to create a connection interface. So to do that, let's go to the content browser. We'll right click and go to blueprints and choose blueprint interface. There we go. And I'll create it and name it BP underscore a character interaction. I think it might be a good name. Cool. So here I have a blueprint interface. So it's a blueprint class of the interaction type. So I'll open it and we can see that there's nothing here at the moment. There isn't a viewport at all, is there? So it looks slightly different. So it's a blueprint of a different class with only a few resources. It's just a function, really. What I can do with it is I can name it. So we'll do that. I'll name it interact. Cool. So this is a different type of blueprint, isn't it? It's a function, but I can select it. I can't link it. I can't do anything with it. This is all I have. And that's because it's just an interface, which we gave a specific name. That's all. So that's all we need to do in this blueprint. I can't add anything here. Now the blueprint interface is installed in my game. So what's the next step? What do we need to do now? Well, the first thing is I need to include this interface within the first person, which is going to be our sender. So that every time I click the left mouse button, it's going to send a message. So we have to do this, okay? So before anything, we'll create a function. We'll create a function with the left mouse button, and keep in mind that we have to create an action since there's no variation in action mapping. We have to create it in our input settings, in our project settings. So let's do it now so we can get it included. Let's go down to input, and we need to create an action mapping here, and I'm going to name it interact. And we'll select the left mouse button for this option. Perfect. So it's already added our left mouse button to the list of inputs. Cool. So now let's go to the first person blueprint, and then we'll add the function to it. Let me just save all first. Cool. So let's create our function for interaction now. Now there is an event here that I can use that I've just set up. So we can use that one. Just because we just already put it into our input, didn't we? Interact, so we can select that as our event. Now let's think about how this function has to be. Well, how should this work? What do we want in our scene? So let's suppose now I'm in our scene, we're navigating in it, and let's suppose we come across an object and I want to interact with it. So I click the object, and obviously in play mode at the moment, for example, when you come up to the sphere and you want to change the color, maybe you want to change a light, for example, on the lampshade, you should be able to click on it and then interact with it. When you come over to this object, you should be able to click on this, etc., and interact with them. So first of all, we need to enable the first person to have the ability to recognize the object that you're clicking on. Otherwise, how will it know which object you want to interact with? So we need to create an interface in the first person so they can send a message to the object, okay? So that interaction, the messaging connection works. So also, we need to remember that they're going to be seen as well. So if I push a button, for example, and change material or whatever, we need to be able to see that on the screen, don't we? And also it's helpful to know where the actor is, or where the person is pointing or aiming at. So this is what we'll do. We'll just specify that first. How do we specify which object we want to interact with? Well, we've already done something similar to this earlier, haven't we? If you remember in the previous classes when we looked at the line tracing, we did this through the print string, didn't we? We worked out how to use the hit actor to identify the objects, and then it was sending a line trace, which is almost like a laser beam, wasn't it? And then it identified what object it was that we were pointing at. Okay, so that's something we've done before, and it's a similar method when it comes to this interface interaction that we're looking at now. So we can't use this function in exactly the same way. Otherwise, it's going to be finding objects all the time by frame, and we don't want that. So let's just reorganize our screen a little bit so we've got a bit more space, and pull this up here. We need to create a new line tracing because this one here is being executed at 1 frame per second. So we'll create a line tracing that's only going to run when we click the button, and it will be based on the object that we are looking at. Okay, so when we click it. So I add a new line, a line tracing channel here. There we go. Nice. And just remember from our line trace class how we did this. We have to start, which is the start coordinate and the end one. Okay, so let's just think about this and how we're going to set this one up. Now, the origin is the camera position, the distance that it can be, and we can keep the distance the same, which is in meters we used before in line trace. We used a line trace variable, didn't we? So the same thing can be done here, but I don't need to redo all the variables because some of them could be useful for us. So I can just go to get world location and link that here. For example, you can reorganize a node if you want to make sure it doesn't intertwine, and link this one here as well. Okay, so because we already have these functions working, then it means we don't need to recreate anything. Otherwise that would be wasting time, wouldn't it? So let's leave it like this, and let's open our preview so we can identify it a bit better. And let's set this to 3 seconds. So when I push the button, it's going to shoot out the line from the coordinates of the other line tracing setup, and they'll be working here simultaneously because this will always be working. And this one will start only, this will start just once. It will hit something and come back with information. Okay. So we got that set up so far. What do we need to do next? Well, we have our line tracing now. So what we need to do from this moment is I need to send a message saying something like the object that I'm pointing to is this object, right? So how would you do that within a blueprint? Well, this is where our interface blueprint comes in. So to do this, we've created an interface blueprint and we called it BP character interact, didn't we? So this is where this starts to get interesting now. We need to implant this interface blueprint in the first person. And we can go to class settings, and you'll see this here, interfaces. Okay, and we can, it says here, implemented interfaces. And you'll see that there's nothing here, is there? So what we need to do is find it. We'll type in the name of our blueprint, which is BP character interact. There we go. So it's implanted that interface now in our class settings. So now that means it's part of the group of objects that's going to communicate amongst itself. So now we need to do the routine of sending the message now that we've got the interact in place. So to do that, the object we're colliding with is what we need to communicate with. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to identify the object. For now, we've got the shot hitting something. Then we need something to happen. We need to tell it to send the message to the object that's being collided with. So just keep in mind that just as we get our hit results from the line here, we can pull out here and we have our hit actor. So I'll show you another way to do it, because there are always more than one way to do things, aren't there? We pull out, we get this break, which is the break node. So I think this is easier for us to play around with these nodes, but there is another way. It's just a case of splitting it up, okay? So you right click and split. It's basically the same, but we're staying within this node. So I have to choose out hit actor, and it's going to get the actor that was hit. And now we'll use our interface blueprint. So we typed in interact. So from this actor node link here, just pull out and type in interact. And we'll use this one in brackets, interact message. So it sends a message. And if you get it from here, like there, then the other things will show up as well. Called interact. These are not the ones we want, but we want the one with the message. Okay, so you just do it this way. And this little envelope will appear and it's sending a message. That's what it means. So when it shoots, it hits an object, the message is then sent out. Okay, so theoretically, what we're doing is we're sending a message that we want to interact with this object. So I've sent that message to the object. That's all good. Now let's get our print string, and then we'll be able to see what's going on. We use this print string quite a lot, don't we? It's really handy. I'm sure you're getting used to it now, just so you can see what's going on. Okay, we just plugged it in like that. Cool. So I'll just add it here again and go to our scene. Now we press play. You see that? So it shows it's hitting the BP set material, hitting the cube, hitting the floor. And from the moment I click the mouse, I interact with the object. Okay, cool. So we finished our first person interaction, right? Let me leave this here. I'll delete them later on, but we'll just comment on this section and we'll call it interact function. So it's the interaction function we're including in our first person. Okay, cool. And you can see when I press play that I'm shooting everyone and it's sending a message, isn't it? But nothing happens because none of them are able to recognize the message at this stage. So there's a little bit more work we need to do. Okay, we have to install or set up the possibility to interact with the object and translate that message into some sort of response or action. So now, as we mentioned in the beginning, I've installed it in our first person, which we can see in the scene. And now I have to install it in the sphere, which is the object that's going to be hitting. So how do I do that? Because we need to install it in the receiver in a way that it will understand the message. So let's look at this then. So I don't want that key. What I'll do is I'll do it via the first person interface, the same way I've installed it in our first person. So I have to install the same interface in all of the blueprints that I want to be interacting with. Almost like that's like our Wi-Fi signal, so they can recognize the message. It's probably a good way of describing it, really. It's almost like putting them on the same Wi-Fi connection, and then everything has an easier way of connecting. Compile and save, and now the interface is also implanted here, connected, we could say. So now all I have to do is create an event that will, when receiving a message from the first person, will then execute an action. So to do that, we can right click here, and after the interface has been created, the event is available here. See that? Event interact, and it's an event with the name that I gave it when we looked at the inputs in project settings. So now it shows the event node, but there's an interface blueprint icon here. So why is that? Because it's connected, right? And then when it shoots, it's going to shoot this line trace, and it's going to recognize the object, and then it sends a message out. The object receives the message, and the message will say, oh, there's a message from first person. Let's run this. And from this point on, you now have the object responding to the first person. Okay, let's see what happens. So once it's hit, look at that. It started to work, right? And just with the keyboard, we can keep running through the different colors that we set up. Pretty cool, right? I'm sure your mind's racing through the different possibilities you can use now with this setup within your blueprint. So I'm sending out the message to the queue, but it's not responding, or the floor is not responding. These items aren't responding. Why? Because we haven't set up the ability for it to receive and respond, have we? So this is really cool. This is a nice tool from Unreal, making these blueprint connections via interface. So we'll use this in practical terms later on. And you might find you use them in quite a lot of your blueprints that are going to interact in some way via the first person. In fact, if not all of them, because the player's moving through the experience, and you might have different items or furniture or things you want it to respond to, and it needs to know what is it sending, who is it sending the message to, and the receiver needs to be able to be connected in the same way, like being on the same Wi-Fi, and then be able to respond to the message. Cool. Now, obviously, you'll need to, make sure that all of this is set up and explained clearly in the game mode instructions for whatever you're creating. So the first person knows which buttons to press and what it will enable it to do. But we can look at all of that later on. Okay. All that we wanted to do in this class was show you how to set this up in terms of the interaction. So we'll use this blueprint that we created with the lampshade, with the chandelier, okay? So in the next class, we'll do it quickly, but using those blueprints. So see you then.